It started with a siren, sharp, blaring, cutting through the quiet hum of the morning traffic like a blade. Admiral Jonathan "Jack" Ellis barely had time to glance in his rearview mirror before the flashing red and blue lights swallowed his reflection. He pulled over, his heart steady, his mind sharp. He had served his country for over 30 years. What could possibly be the problem? A uniformed officer approached his window, hand already resting on his holstered gun. "License and registration," the cop barked. Jack complied without hesitation, handing over the documents. The officer barely glanced at them before stepping back and unhooking his weapon. "Out of the car," he ordered. Jack's pulse quickened, but he kept his face calm. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Out! Now!" The gun was drawn, aimed squarely at his chest. A lifetime of discipline kept Jack from reacting. Slowly, he pushed the door open and stepped onto the pavement. The sun was bright overhead, casting sharp shadows. A few pedestrians had stopped to watch. "Get on your knees!" Jack's jaw tightened. "I will not. Tell me what this is about." The officer didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his radio. That's when Jack noticed something. Other squad cars pulling up. 4, 5, 6 of them, sirens wailing as they swarmed the street like vultures sensing fresh carrion. Jack had been in combat. He had been in enemy territory, but never, not once, had he felt this kind of danger in his own homeland. Then everything unraveled. Jack didn't move. His instincts, honed through decades of service, screamed at him to stay calm. A dozen scenarios raced through his mind. Mistaken identity? A setup? Something bigger? Before he could ask another question, 2 officers lunged at him, shoving him against the hood of his car. Cold steel clamped around his wrists. "You're under arrest," one of them growled. Jack didn't resist. He could hear a growing crowd of bystanders murmuring, a few pulling out their phones. "For what?" he asked, his voice level but firm. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he yanked Jack toward a waiting squad car. The streets, the buildings, the city he had served and protected blurred past as they forced him inside. This wasn't an ordinary stop. This was something else. And Jack intended to find out exactly what. The ride to the station was silent, except for the occasional squawk of the radio. Jack studied the officers in the front seat. The one driving had a stiff, robotic posture, hands locked at 10 and 2. The other had his fingers tapping against his holster, his jaw clenched tight. Something about this wasn't standard procedure. They didn't even run his ID before throwing him in cuffs. They knew who he was. The car pulled into a nondescript side entrance of the police station, bypassing the public entry. Jack was escorted through a dimly lit hallway, past holding cells filled with drunks and disorderlies, but he wasn't taken to booking. They led him into a small interrogation room. No windows, one metal chair, one metal table, a single camera in the corner, blinking red. Jack sat, rolling his shoulders. "Someone want to tell me why I'm here?" The officers left without a word. Minutes passed. Then the door opened. A man in a dark suit entered, his tie slightly loosened, as if he'd been rushing. He didn't look like a cop, more like a Fed. He dropped a folder on the table and took a seat. "Admiral Ellis," the man said, "you should not have been at that hotel last night." Jack's blood turned to ice. He had been at a hotel last night, a quiet dinner meeting with an old friend, a retired Army general. They had discussed nothing classified, just catching up, swapping stories, but clearly someone thought otherwise. Jack narrowed his eyes. "You're going to have to be more specific." The man exhaled through his nose as if irritated. He opened the folder. Inside were grainy security photos, Jack and his friend at dinner. And then a second photo. A man in a gray suit, sitting alone at the bar, barely visible in the background. The Fed tapped the photo. "This man disappeared 2 hours after you left the hotel." Jack studied the image. He didn't recognize the man, but something about this reeked of a setup. "And you think I had something to do with it?" Jack asked, keeping his voice steady. The Fed leaned in. "I know you had something to do with it. The question is, do you?" Jack let the silence stretch. He had been interrogated before, but never by his own countrymen. "This is a mistake," Jack said finally. "You need to check your facts." The Fed smirked, sliding another photo across the table. This one was clearer. The man in the gray suit was handing a small black envelope to a waiter just before Jack and his friend arrived. That wasn't good, because Jack knew what black envelopes meant. Covert operations, off-the-record transactions. Something top secret was happening, and now he was in the middle of it. Before he could respond, the door burst open. Another man entered, this one older, bald, with piercing blue eyes. Jack recognized him immediately. Director Thomas Lane, CIA. And if he was here, things had just escalated beyond local law enforcement. The Fed stood and nodded. "Sir." Lane didn't even look at him. He focused on Jack. "Release him." The Fed blinked. "But sir, I said release him." The tension in the room was suffocating, but the Fed didn't argue. He stood, hesitated for a moment, then walked out. Lane sat in his place, fingers interlocked. "You need to come with me. Now." Jack met his gaze. "Why?" Lane exhaled. "Because someone just tried to kill you, and this is only the beginning." Jack followed Lane out of the station through a side door where a black SUV was waiting. As they drove, Lane briefed him. The man in the gray suit was named Philip Mercer. He was an intelligence broker, worked for multiple foreign agencies. He had information that someone didn't want getting out. "And you think I was the target?" Jack asked. "You were the distraction," Lane corrected. "The target was Mercer, and now someone is cleaning up loose ends." Jack let that sink in. "So why arrest me?" Lane's expression darkened. "Because someone inside law enforcement is working against us, someone powerful." Jack's stomach clenched. If the system was compromised, this went deeper than he'd thought. And worse, if Lane was right, Jack wasn't just in danger. He was already marked for elimination. The SUV weaved through the city streets, taking an indirect route as if they were already being watched. Jack glanced out the tinted windows, his mind racing. 30 years in the Navy had taught him how to recognize a battlefield. This one was just made of concrete and politics instead of bullets and warships. Lane's voice cut through the tense silence. "We're taking you somewhere safe." Jack scoffed. "Safe?" "They arrested me in broad daylight. That means they don't care who sees." "Safe isn't on the table anymore." Lane didn't argue. Instead, he handed Jack a burner phone. "You'll need this." Jack took it but didn't power it on. "Tell me what I'm dealing with." Lane hesitated. Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it over. Jack unfolded it. Just one name was written on it. His blood ran cold. He knew that name. It was supposed to be buried, classified beyond top secret. It belonged to a man who didn't officially exist, the architect of black operations that even the U.S. government denied, a man who made spies disappear. Jack exhaled. "You're telling me he's involved?" Lane nodded. "And he wants you dead." Jack leaned back in his seat, processing. "Why now?" he asked. "Why go after me?" Lane kept his eyes on the road. Mercer had something, a list, names, locations, accounts. If that list gets out, it'll expose more than just rogue agents. It'll reveal everything, every operation, Every cover-up. Jack frowned. And you think I have it? No, Lane said. But they think you know where it is. Jack clenched his jaw. He didn't have Mercer's list, but if people thought he did, that made him a target. A dead target. The SUV took a sharp turn, and Jack noticed something in the side mirror. A black sedan had been following them for the last few blocks, and it wasn't alone. 2 motorcycles had flanked the sedan, their riders keeping pace. Jack's instincts kicked in. "We're being followed," he said. Lane didn't react. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out a pistol, keeping it low. The sedan suddenly accelerated. Jack braced himself. Then, tires screeched. Guns flashed. The first bullet shattered the SUV's back window. Jack ducked as the windshield cracked from a second shot. Lane swerved hard, ramming the SUV into one of the motorcycles. The rider flipped violently over the hood before crashing onto the pavement. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed the door handle. "We need to move!" Lane yanked the wheel, sending the SUV into a sharp alleyway. The sedan tried to follow, but skidded too wide, smashing into a parked truck. Jack and Lane burst out of the vehicle, moving fast. Another bullet whizzed past, shattering a streetlight above them. "They're not cops," Jack muttered. "They're hitmen." Lane nodded. "Professional. No wasted shots." A third figure emerged from a nearby rooftop. Sniper. Jack grabbed Lane and yanked him behind cover just as a suppressed round pinged off a metal dumpster where Lane's head had been a second earlier. "We're boxed in," Lane hissed. Jack scanned the alley. There, an old metal fire escape. "Up," Jack ordered. They climbed fast, metal creaking beneath them. The sniper adjusted his position, tracking their movement. Jack reached the rooftop and rolled for cover. Lane followed, panting. "We need to—" Boom! An explosion rocked the alley below. They both turned in time to see the SUV engulfed in flames. Whoever was hunting them wasn't playing around. Jack clenched his fists. It was time to fight back. Jack grabbed the pistol from Lane's holster. "How many rounds?" "Full magazine." "No spare." Jack nodded. Enough for now. The sniper was still out there, but Jack had an advantage. Experience. He crawled low, using the rooftop vents for cover. Lane stayed close. A shadow moved on the opposite rooftop. Jack took a deep breath. One shot. That's all he'd get. He lined up the sights and fired. The sniper's body jerked, then crumpled over the edge. One down, but more were coming. Jack could hear sirens in the distance. Too late. The real enemy wasn't the cops. It was the people pulling their strings. Jack turned to Lane. "We can't keep running." Lane gave a grim nod. "Agreed." Jack tightened his grip on the gun. "Then we take the fight to them." Jack and Lane didn't waste time. The streets below were swarming, black SUVs, unmarked sedans, men in tactical gear moving with precision. Whoever wanted them dead had deep pockets and high-level access. "We need to disappear," Lane muttered. Jack scanned the skyline. "Not yet." Lane frowned. "You have a plan?" Jack smirked. "I have an opportunity." They slipped down the opposite side of the rooftop, finding another fire escape. The streets were hot, but Jack knew the city, knew how to move unseen. 5 minutes later, they ducked into an abandoned warehouse near the docks. It smelled like rust and old oil. Lane pulled out his phone. "I can call for backup." Jack grabbed his wrist. "No phones." "They'll trace it." Lane hesitated, then nodded. Jack exhaled. "We don't call for help. We become the problem." Lane raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" Jack grabbed an old tarp, wiped off some dirt, and looked his old friend in the eye. "We stop running. We hit them first." Lane grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." Jack knew where to start. There was only one man in the city with enough pull to coordinate a hit like this while keeping it off official records. David Rourke, former intelligence, now a ghost in the corporate world, pulling strings for the highest bidder. Jack had crossed paths with him before, back when he still wore the uniform. Rourke was ruthless, efficient, and, most importantly, paranoid. "We find Rourke," Jack said, "and we make him talk." Lane nodded. "I know where he operates. A private club, off the books." Jack smirked. "Then let's crash his party." The club was high-end, low lights, deep pockets, and security tighter than a military base. Jack and Lane walked in like they belonged. No hesitation, no fear. The key to blending in? Confidence. A hostess approached, her eyes flicking between them. "Membership?" Jack smiled. "Rourke invited us." It was a gamble, but the name was powerful enough to get them through the first door. The hostess hesitated, then motioned for security. A large man in a suit stepped forward. "Follow me." Jack and Lane exchanged a look. They followed. The hallway was silent. Too silent. Jack's instincts screamed a warning. Then the guard turned, pulling a gun. Jack moved first. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting hard. A single strike to the throat. The gun clattered to the floor. Lane stepped over the unconscious body. "Well, that didn't take long." Jack smirked. "Let's find Rourke." They reached a private lounge. A single man sat at the bar, swirling a glass of whiskey. David Rourke. He didn't look surprised to see them. "Jack," Rourke said, smiling, "I was wondering when you'd show up." Jack stepped forward. "You set me up." Rourke shrugged. "It's not personal." Jack slammed a fist on the table. "Who ordered the hit?" Rourke chuckled. "Come on, Admiral. You already know." Jack's jaw tightened. Rourke leaned in, lowering his voice. "You're in the middle of something bigger than you realize. Mercer's list? It doesn't just expose rogue agents. It exposes the entire machine." Jack narrowed his eyes. "Who has it?" Rourke sighed. "If I tell you, I'm dead." Lane pulled out his gun. "You're dead anyway." Rourke smirked. "Not if you help me disappear." Jack and Lane exchanged a glance. Rourke leaned back. "There's a man, no official record, no real name. They call him Specter." Jack stiffened. He had heard that name before, and if Specter was involved. This was worse than he thought. Jack exhaled. "Where is he?" Rourke hesitated. Lane cocked his gun. Rourke sighed. "A plane leaves in 2 hours. Private airstrip outside the city. He's on it." Jack nodded. Then he hit Rourke hard across the jaw, knocking him unconscious. Lane raised an eyebrow. "Was that necessary?" Jack grabbed a car key from Rourke's pocket. "Let's go catch a ghost." Jack and Lane stormed out of the club, slipping into Rourke's sleek black sports car. The engine roared as Jack floored it, weaving through the city streets. "Private airstrip. 2 hours," Lane said, checking his watch. "We don't have time for surprises." Jack's jaw tightened. There's always a surprise. The city blurred past them, the car slicing through traffic like a missile. Jack's mind raced. Specter, a name whispered in the darkest corners of intelligence circles. No files, no records, just a myth. But now, the myth was real. And escaping. Jack wasn't about to let that happen. They reached the airstrip just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red. Jack killed the engine a mile out. "We walk from here," Lane nodded, checking his weapon. Ahead, the airstrip was quiet, but not empty. A private jet idled on the tarmac. Men in black suits flanked the runway, their movements precise. Military. "This is bigger than I thought," Lane muttered. Jack scanned the field. Then he saw him. Specter, a tall figure in a tailored gray suit, walking toward the jet with a briefcase. Calm, unrushed. Jack exhaled. "We end this now." Jack and Lane moved fast, silent, using the shadows. Then a guard turned. Population. Jack fired first, his suppressed shot dropping the man instantly. Chaos erupted. Guards scrambled. Shouts filled the air. Jack and Lane sprinted, taking cover behind a stack of cargo crates. Specter didn't even flinch. He kept walking toward the jet. Jack gritted his teeth. Not this time. Jack picked off another guard, clearing a path. Lane covered him, suppressing fire, keeping the remaining men pinned. Specter was 10 feet from the stairs. Jack broke cover, sprinting. Specter turned, finally acknowledging him. He smiled. Then he reached into his coat. Jack didn't hesitate. He fired, twice. Specter staggered. Blood bloomed on his crisp gray suit. But he didn't fall. He laughed. Jack slowed, gun still raised. Then he saw it. Specter's hand wasn't reaching for a weapon. It was holding a detonator. Specter's voice was calm. "You have no idea what you've just done." Jack's trigger finger tightened. "Drop it." Specter shook his head. "You think this ends with me? You're wrong." Lane stepped forward, gun raised. "Take the shot, Jack." Specter exhaled. Then, click. Jack dove. The explosion ripped through the airstrip. The jet, the crates, the runway, all consumed in fire. Heat, pressure, silence. Then, darkness. Jack woke to the sound of sirens. The airstrip was in ruins. Smoke curled into the night sky. Lane sat beside him, bloodied but alive. "We did it." Jack's head pounded. "Specter?" Lane shook his head. "Gone. No body." Jack exhaled. Of course, a man like Specter never truly died. But the list, Mercer's list, was recovered, and the hunt was over. For now. Jack pushed himself up, wincing. One thing was certain. This war wasn't over. Not yet. What would you do if you were in the Admiral's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Enjoyed this thrilling story? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories.